Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you and extend our hospitality to all the guests who have traveled from long distances to be here with us. Thank you very much for coming. And I'm sure you're going to have a very fruitful 2 days. It gives me a great pleasure to see the very fruitful culmination of months of preparation. When I had just joined here, I had talked about holding a media seminar, and it took months of preparation. And I would like to thank Dr. Siddharth, who is the Chair, Department of International Relations, Mr. Vijay Nayak, who is my comrade in arms from IIC, and I roped him in to be here with us, Dr. Malika Shakya, Dr. Nabrun Roy, and of course, Mr. Prahlad. They were all together instrumental in making this conference together. We wanted to organize a media conference drawing on different perspectives which would come from the several eminent journalists across the region. The themes that will be covered dwell on challenges of how the media reports on issues concerning the region, South Asia as a whole, and what the role of media is in advancing the cause of regional consciousness and popular culture with a specific focus on the arts and the media in the region. I sat in to the building of this conference, and we thought that people have become important, perhaps even more important than governments. And so we should bring in popular culture, which are the manifestations of the people themselves. We in South Asian University take our mandate very seriously that we should develop a shared regional consciousness in the South Asian region. We recognize that it is important to bring enlightened voices from different parts of the region in a collective conversation, and also engage in differences in perceptions, perspectives, and sensibilities to better understand and appreciate our distinctive points of view and where we are coming from. In this, of course, the media has a particularly important role to play because it can create both a negative ecology and a positive ecology. It circulates representations of the region on a daily basis. I'm sure in other countries too, but at least in our country, 24/7. And so it has a far greater reach and influence than perhaps any other medium, especially the electronic media. It is omnipresent, and most citizens of South Asia are avid consumers of news. You go to even a chai wala stall as you drive, and you will see people clustered around a television screen, or somebody is reading a newspaper and everybody is clustered around hearing it. I've done some work on Old Delhi, and I was quite surprised to find that even in the early 19th century, when the newspapers began to circulate, there were actually spots where the newspaper man would just put his newspapers and leave. And people would come and pick them up and read them out to people who collected around him over their doodh and jalebi. Those days, tea was not drunk the way it is drunk today. We are of the view that the conference provides an excellent forum to, first of all, audit the current state of play in terms of South Asia as a region and individual countries and how they are represented. And second, what can be done to further our normative objective of coming to terms with differences and living peacefully. This can turn into a very simplistic worldview, and we are aware of that danger. it is not that we wish to gloss over differences in the world of political representation. The intent is to encourage a candid conversation, which will bring all these contending images to the fore and better appreciate how we can perhaps do things differently for our collective well-being. The media, again, can take a very, very important and constructive role in dismantling national and and ultimately reinforcing the realization that whatever may be our differences, we need to understand that we will either sink together or swim together. There are only two things you can't choose: your parents and your neighbor and your geography. And we need to understand that. All too often, the regional consciousness gets entangled with bilateral relations and concerns. In the field of education, I know, recently I've been researching the kind of educational hubs that have formed in Asia. In fact, I myself spoke on it and also turned the FICCI Annual Educational Summit into the Asian Imperative Summit this time. There are very fruitful interactions between Southeast Asia, collaborations, whole cities, whole nations turning into educational hubs, and East Asia. So you have Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and then you have China, South Korea, Japan, all entering into, impacted by the Bologna process and the Lisbon strategies, turning into educational hubs and creating student mobility and faculty mobility, research mobility, collaboration. But South Asia, the South Asian University has the potential to become that kind of a hub, provided all the stakeholders in the university also manage to get out of their narrow disciplines and narrow perceptions to create a regional consciousness. As South Asians, we need to focus on developing our South Asian identity, believe in ourselves as a region. Instead of constantly harping on what SARC has not as yet achieved, we need to focus on what has been done and the context, the very difficult context in which it has been done. We need to prioritize our regional objectives and streamline them with national priorities. This means that various government agencies have to be sensitized to look beyond the national concerns and factor in the regional ones. Of course, there are well-known agendas for the SARC, issues of connectivity, physical connectivity, electronic media, and economic integration, and all the other good things. But I would like to add the connectivity of the mind. Because unless the mind will get connected, nothing else will get connected. Because while we will say one thing, we will do quite another. So unless this regional consciousness is developed, which envisages that regional progress that we owe to our people will not happen. And the region will always be held hostage to what Ambassador Shilkan Sharma has said, the twilight of bilateral relations. We need to sensitize all stakeholders and carry them along. And media is the only agency which can do it as it molds public opinion. It alone can help in winning the hearts and minds of people, to give them a sense of purpose, that certain policies and plans have to be implemented, not because we are on a negotiating table and we are scoring points against each other, but in our own enlightened self-interest. That unless we do it, this region, which is the most populated region of the world, the poorest region of the world, with the highest number of young people, with the lowest equity in the world, issues of social stratification, issues of gender, issues of malnutrition, poverty, all these are rampant and they can only be solved collectively. We hope that all of you will have a very stimulating engagement in the next few days on the chosen theme of the conference. We are all here with an open mind, keen to learn new things and nuance our understanding of a very important domain that has a bearing on the overall well-being of our region in the world. With these words, may I now welcome Mr. Jawhar Sircar, of course as the CEO of Prasar Bharti, but also as a very dear personal friend. And it's always very nice to say good things in public for a good personal friend. One. It also actually gives me an opportunity to look at your profile because I'm constantly joking with you, so I never quite, have looked at it so carefully. Mr. Jawhar Sircar is an Indian civil servant with 40 years of experience and presently the Chief Executive Officer of Prasar Bharti, arguably probably the most influential media organization of India. He served as Secretary of the Ministry of Culture, Government of India from late 2008 to February 2012, where he reported directly to the Prime Minister for most of his tenure. He resigned to take over his current position, for which he was chosen by an eminent panel led by the Vice President of India and a Supreme Court judge. As Culture Secretary, he initiated long-pending reforms and took up the modernization of museums, archives, and libraries, for which he has been awarded the British Museum Medal. I wonder if you could still help in putting the libraries and museums and archives into connectivity in South Asia. That is such an important thing for which I keep batting, but have not yet made too much headway. But so much of our riches lie in those museums and libraries, and why I put them together is because we haven't got a very good demarcation between museums and libraries. Some material will lie in the museums and the others will lie in the libraries. And archiving has been a great pitfall in all of South Asian region. As CEO, he supervises India's public service broadcaster, which is among the largest such networks in the world and covers well over 1 billion people through 570 stations of All India Radio and Doordarshan. As a large orthodox organization of government servants, it is difficult to modernize, but Jawhar Sircar has been able to break new grounds and introduce digital technologies and cut down on obsolescence. He has received 3 awards for this in 3 years. He has been elected as Vice President of the world's largest public TV and radio organization, the Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union, on which 67 nations are represented. Jawhar Sircar is a member of the Governing Councils of Indian Council of World Affairs, Consortium for Educational Communication, Film and Television Institute of India, and also trustee or governing board member of IIM Kolkata, Victoria Memorial Museum, Indian Museum, National Library, National School of Drama, IGNCA, the 3 national academies, and many, many other organizations. Recently, he has been nominated on the National Advisory Council of SPICMECE and also nominated on the National Executive Council of CII. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Mr. Sircar, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Vice Chancellor, Professor Sharma, friends, I am perhaps most unlikely candidate to be standing here, and I am here for no fault of mine. I just happened by accident to look after the public broadcasting, but I love to get together with free minds. Having spent about 4 decades with claustrophobia of rules and why things can't be done, it's always a pleasure to come out where people think normally, argue normally, and have what I would call a normal approach to life. My little association with the press begins as a cub reporter in the Statesman and, and an announcer in All India Radio, from which I jumped off to this exam and got in. And after 4 decades, I would say life is a series of mistakes that can only be punctuated by blunders and catastrophes. Coming to the subject of, or the core of the subject of building mutual understanding, it's just not a question of a group of countries in the world trying to get together. It's perhaps the most explosive region in the world. It's not a bunch of Pacific countries sitting together or North American countries sitting together and discussing mutual irritants. We are defined as one of the most explosive regions in the world. And to start the argument by saying that we have a similarity that transcends everything else. At an airport, when you're sitting, you know that person is a South Asian. You don't need to know whether he's Indian or Pakistani or Sri Lankan. You know he's this thing. So we know we are different as a group from the rest of the world, and yet our differences take us to levels that sometimes feel so frustrating. I would just pose a series of questions rather than try to, because you are the practitioners, series of questions on the feasibility of the idea at all, whether mutual understanding is at all possible. My first submission would be that we in the media, whether government sponsored, government aided, independent of the government, have an area of what I call the national consensus. And this, I think, is worth revisiting. We tend to lull ourselves into one sort of a coordinated discourse, which perhaps would not stand the scrutiny of facts. I am on the news. I have the news of almost all South Asian countries reaching me, and the divergence of reporting makes you wonder whether fact is the first liability in this entire battle. I am referring to hardcore facts. On a single incident, if you open up the news channel or the news item or the Byte or Twitter or Facebook, you would get 4 distinctly different versions. Is truth, therefore, a captive of conflicting viewpoints? Of course it is. Let's get to the point. Of course it is. Therefore, how would it be possible to arrive at what we call the more helicopter view of what actually happens? Well, there is a way. In the Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union of now 70 nations, there's an attempt that 15 nations have done, and it's called a news pool. A news pool, it's called the AVN, the Asia Vision Network, in which media persons tend to send in their pool news for being picked up. It's certainly not a very attractive proposition at all, and I find my boys aghast at taking what we call news from there. I said, what else? Their argument was that it's not very relevant. The question of relevance is built on the present obsession. Do we all need to fall into the present obsession just because it makes good news or it makes bad news or it makes news per se? These are questions that we need to ask. Hidden below this debate, on the raging debate that's going on right now and has found cross-border statements coming out, and the other one, of course, the Bihar elections, it would make us seem that these are the two issues that concern a subcontinent much more than the fact that it has the larger number of people below the poverty line, larger number of malnourished people, because malnourishment is not news per se unless it can be converted into a dramatic starvation death or suicide. The newsification, if I may use the term, of a fact. So the first submission that I would make is that let's start from where it is possible. Could we start by pooling? I mean, it's only a thought the news bodies would have to get together by pooling in news stories, and I would prefer to have the good stories. The good story chains that we have started introducing would show how a spunky girl under completely underprivileged circumstances in Sri Lanka, in India, in Pakistan, in Maldives is making it almost in the same manner. We bring this thing in a very imaginative way to what I would call the real issues. B, I would not even touch upon issues that concern our friends, like is there enough freedom, what happens in the case of suppression of freedom. These are issues on which we have had immense number of debates. But freedom per se would not only be in terms of the relative legislative structure and the capacity of the state to make it small or big, to enlarge the freedom or to contract the freedom. Freedom for us in the media would also mean a distancing from the universal or the global debate. The global debate, as every person worth his salt knows, is controlled by what we know as a Euro-American discourse. And how is it possible? Let me give you an example. I was going through some figures. The Indian media often praises itself for its size, for its depth, for its coverage, and for what you call its vibrancy. Of course, there is a lot of vibrancy here. But then, if you come down to brass tacks, the Indian media is now standing at about 1.3 lakh crores. In billions of dollars, it is $17 billion industry. $17 billion. Let us take a look at the American media. Right now, it is 350 billion. So do we get our figures correct? So whatever be the attempt of 17 billion, it cannot stand up to the might of 350 billion. Now let's add the economies, the press economy, the media economies of all our neighbors put together. We would not cross 25 billion. So if you put 25, 28 billion against 350 billion, you know where you're standing. So there is the big brother who determines whether the issues in Syria are moral or immoral. Whether the carpet bombing of Iraq, as they called it, where the weapons of mass destruction were supposed to be found in abundant quantities, are something. Whether the triggering off of a domino chain in the Middle East is a moral extension of an e-crusade. They decide. And within them, the sides are taken between the bad boys who come in from some other state and bomb. Now, these are issues out of which we need to find an escape. In other words, I would put it partly like a semi-politician, having worked with them for 40 years. One of the ways of cementing unity would be to find the other and get at him. So we have the other. The other is very visible in the sense of the Fox, CNN, and others. And we have an overbearing presence of the media, of what I call the Euro-American media, or more precisely the American media. It starts with an Australian migrating here and there. The Australian gentleman is very much present in India also. he's out-pocketing with deep pockets everyone else out of India. That's a time. Now, having said that, has it ever been possible to get out of the discourse? Well, the best example that comes to my mind is Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera made the most sincere attempt to break free. And Al Jazeera had very deep pockets. Number one, which one among us has pockets enough to finance an Al Jazeera on our own? Number two, Al Jazeera copied the same, it was a clone of the media that it sought to contend against, and much of its manpower, much of its presentation was identical, a clone of the one that it sought to contend, and which explains the reasons for its success. That it did not variegate, it did not come on to something, let us say, Middle Eastern. It sought to take the discourse on the terms of the discourse. That's it. But the isolation of Al Jazeera and the travails it is going through, deep pockets or no pockets, with its correspondents getting jailed and others, would show what happens if you are not particularly liked. In the world of media, liking has not been the first and foremost quality for which people join the profession. In fact, distancing, a bit of controlled aggression would be a better tool of trade. Any case, so we move on this one. Then let us take the emerging scenario all over South Asia. Corporate control. Corporate control and what we call cross-media hegemony is appearing as a second ghost on the scene. We aren't observing it very carefully, but when you see the corporatization of media, one takes it one takes it in a different spirit. We say, finally we have the Sethjis or the Baniyas or whatever we call them, leaving in favor of much more professional management. But as the cub reporter knows, when he's stuck at 15,000 to 20,000 rupees a month, that it ain't no better. But at the top end, we have people. I'll give an example. I can mention the group also. One particular group, our friends in the media, control TV broadcasting along with me. They have TV content distribution through cable. They control the Sky, Dish TV. They control print to a large extent. And they have all the verticals coming in there, and now they are on social media. They are being contended upon by the big brother of Indian industry that has just taken over CNN, IBN through a backdoor coup. And their fingers are everywhere. These emerging cross-media holdings, as I call them, are producing colossus. And these colossus are, if I may say, may prove to be more dangerous than the colossus of government. Because within the governmental colossus, or whatever you call it, remains the intrinsic blundering babu, who can still be made accountable. The fellow can still be made accountable, and he's not passionately hegemonistic, he's just being cussed by nature, that's all. So we have a system which is still challengeable and a favorite punching bag, versus a system where they play by their rules and take over at midnight. So these cross-media holdings have another issue that we need to keep in mind, because the best of intentions could lead us into situations where you have a mini Fox or a mini CNN or a CNN coming in the way. The reverse is also possible. In other words, these same mega groups taking over groups in other countries and forming conglomerates. I am not sure how happy that situation would be, but there is a possibility of that emerging. We come over the other issue of the internet. respectable journalists are still aghast at what they would term as the irresponsibility of the blog and the net. And we are yet to come to terms with it. We have to come to terms with it, whether it is a question of an alleged competition that gets away free of cost, or whether it is an unregulated sphere that tends to canker us. These are issues we can talk about. But the fact of the internet being there and will be there, the net version, is another reality we have to take account of. To me, the internet has appeared to be a major bonder as a thinking human, because every day I'm sending messages across to Pakistan, Bangladesh, and my friends there, and I keep getting responses from similar humans to situations on which we have complete amity. We don't need to get political. I'm not political. I don't even understand it in 40 years, but never mind. But I know when a bad thing is being done that one needs to call the shots, call it. Now we're coming to, let us say, when we talk about cross-media, when we talk about a supranational identity emerging, what are the priorities? Unfortunately for us, the discourse all over South Asia has been determined by a well-educated, English-educated elite that has declared left liberal to be synonymous with whatever is right. As a person who strongly believes in both left and liberal, I would still say that is not the end of the story. If that had been the end of the story, we would not get these discordant voices coming up. We would not get these voices coming up. So in other words, there is a discourse beyond the urban elite. The elite professing its avowed liberal left dogma as the only acceptable one. In fact, I do suspect that whether it be in India or in Pakistan or in other countries or very much in Bangladesh, a language that I understand very well, the tensions are more between the fact of the English-speaking elite upholding a particular ideology as the only acceptable one versus a sense of deprivation of those who were not brought up in that language and do not share the same worldview. Tolerance need not be always enforced from them who are less fortunate. Tolerance also needs to be given by those who were more. In other words, bringing discordant voices within the system calls for more patience. More patience. I know my deep friends on the left liberal are not going to like it, but then I think it is an expression of the liberal thought to say, let the other guy have his voice. What's wrong? But voice up to what? Voice up to what John Stuart Mill had said. Liberty means I can extend my arm in any direction until it smacks the cheek of another. Stop short at the other's cheek. We have to make our ground rules. I would also be a little critical of our media in the way they viewed any code of discipline. The question of any code coming from anybody who has faintly any aroma or odor of state makes it completely an explosive subject. So here I would just touch upon one issue. We all lapped up the scandal of the red-haired lady in the tabloid with the Prime Minister in London. What followed out of the News of the World scandal was a Leveson report. And a Leveson report, like a true Lord Leveson's report, is a weighty document which I shall read after full retirement. It's a huge document. Its summary itself is worth going into, and its executive summary was presented all over India. Not a word was raised in the free press. Not a word about the code that needs to be followed to maintain the same freedom of the press was not even raised. Not a single newspaper in India mentioned Leveson and the report. Now, these are the limits to what I call the liberal discourse. There are these limits that we don't observe, and therefore, if some crank comes up and tells you, he's actually giving a wake-up call. We have this phenomenon of paid news and stuff like that. We have 100,000 newspapers registered with the RNI, Register of Newspapers. And many of them are for the sole purpose of getting advertisements, which means another line of control, another line of corruption and control. So these are issues that we need to look inwardly. I would not like a bureaucrat to come and tell me what's wrong with this. These call for introspection within us. And these are ailments that go across the board. These are some of the issues on which we need to focus upon. But the short point is, there are problems of understanding between our state systems, our state players, between other players, and between those on the extreme fringe everywhere that represent another option. You see, in Bengal, we had an interesting, I think there are a couple of Bangladeshis here. We had a very, very interesting system. We were out on the outer edge of India. That's where all the sediment of the Ganga and Brahmaputra collect. So we were there as some sort of a thing at the other end. And civilizing influences were sent from Uttar Pradesh. Maybe my family was one of them, both among Hindus and Muslims. Sayyids and others were sent to bring that to order. The Bengalis, being what they are, chose to follow their own normative structures. Until today, they worship folk gods like Olai Chandi, and next door is the same version of a deity called Alai Bibi. So just make it Bibi and Chandi and this and that and Peer and all that. They go on very happily. For the last 200 years, there has been an attempt to make it a little more civilized. While the Sanskritists have torn their hair to say what sort of Hinduism is practiced there. The Wahhabis, on the other hand, tear their hair and say, are they practicing Muslims? So we have this discordance, we have this dissonance, and we are pretty happy about it. We don't need to be centrally documented on anything and raise our arms to. So we have, amidst this huge diversity, a vibrant system of opposing anything that sounds sensible until you have actually proved to me that it was sensible. And between these, the proof often takes a few days of a few hundred cups of tea. This being, so here again we have a state where we have the state actors, we have the major press players, and many of the press players are aligned to, let us say, the central discourse for reasons that they themselves would know. We have in Delhi a huge breed of what we call the farmhouse journalists. Journalists who own farmhouses, each one of them would be about 100 to 200 crores. So we have these farmhouse journalists, we have the plot beneficiary journalists, we have all sorts of journalists who are morally upright and loquacious in their delivery, but have economic stability far more than you and I could ever imagine. Now, this being the given setup between the state actors, between the corporates in the media, who are usually aligned in some way or the other to the central discourse, to the exclusion of the possibility of something else, we have also the crusading journalists. And more important, we have peoples across the board who love each other, who have no rancor against each other, but are not given any voice, any articulation in the overall structured debate. It is only when, through the mechanisms that I have mentioned and much more that you will also find, that they lend themselves a voice would emerge what I call the overall consensus, the underlying consensus that binds the culture of people who have been together for millennia and centuries and cannot be rendered asunder because of an ideology. Any single ideology has been proven to be faulty to the extent that the comfort that a person thought one could get by adhering to a single ideology or a single identity has been rudely disturbed the next day when you have dissension within that ideology. Within that ideology, you have dissensions coming. So, chasing a common land. That's my warning bell. I have to go back and earn my livelihood. So, as I said, that between these layers of identities that populate these geographical entities, there is still hope, because I know from 100 friends that when they go to Pakistan or to Bangladesh, or a Bangladeshi comes here, he or she receives a degree of comfort and acceptability that he would not get in the United States of America. We have the comfort, and when I heard someone that the moment he landed in from Rawalpindi onto Delhi airport, he found two persons arguing in fluent, argumentative, and what we call the abusive Punjabi. He felt immediately at home. We were immediately at home. So we have these things that bind us, and we have systems that render us asunder. The contradiction has to be done by the heart articulating itself through the maze of existing economics, politics, and media structures. I retain the hope that within us we have the solidity and the expectation enough to rise above pettiness, and occasional outbursts would be consigned as the creation of the 2 extra cards that come with every pack of 52. Thank you.
Thank you, Jawhar. Dr. Siddharth.
Esteemed President, Dr. Kavita Sharma, our distinguished keynote speaker this morning, Mr. Jawhar Sircar, Your Excellencies, and dear friends. At the outset, I would like to express our deep gratitude to our special guest of honor this morning, Sri Jawhar Sircar, for having delivered this keynote address. I think you flagged a whole range of interesting questions, whether mutual understanding is possible at all in the region, and I read it as an affirmative answer to that question. The big brother as the other, the limits of the liberal discourse, the political economy of global media and what that means for the region, and of course, English as a class marker, the tensions between English and vernacular press, and what that means also in terms of implications for thinking about the media in South Asia. I would also like to place on record our gratitude to Dr. Kavita Sharma, President of South Asian University, for her unstinting support for this event. As academics, we're trained to acknowledge where these ideas come from originally. I think the President was very kind when she suggested at some point that a conference around this subject is well worth it, considering that the media plays such an important role in all our lives. And ultimately, when it comes to trading images, when it comes to thinking about how we form perceptions of others, what perceptions reach our everyday homes, I think the media has a particularly important role to play, and we need to discuss both the media as a spoiler and the media as a constructive player in building mutual understanding in the region. I'd like to thank all our participants who are present here today, this morning. Many of you very generously consented to being part of this conference and have taken the trouble of traveling from your countries. We all recognize that you have several competing claims on your time. It's very nice that you could make it here, and we think that the students of the university and colleagues will all benefit from your presence here. I've also been aided by a very fine team. Mr. Vijay Nayak is here, who's helped us through the process. He's again an exemplar of somebody who can very comfortably converse with different generations. All our younger colleagues really liked to have Mr. Vijay Nayak helping, supporting us intellectually, giving us some very useful inputs into the process. My colleagues, Dr. Nabarun Roy and Dr. Mallika Shakya, were both also very fine sources of support for the conference. And Ahibam Prahalad, Mr. Ahibam Prahalad is a public relations officer who looked into various logistical details surrounding the conference. Any such event, as you all know, involves a whole range of details, and I think Prahalad was keeping track of it on a regular basis. We would also like to place on record our gratitude to both the Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Home Affairs for having given us the requisite approvals and also helped with the process of visa facilitation in cases where it was required. I think this has helped definitely, and we wouldn't have this event without these prior approvals. I would also like to express our gratitude to our Chief Liaison Officer now at the South Asian University on behalf of the Ministry of External Affairs. I think this is a welcome addition and to our university, and we hope that this would help us very much in our subsequent events as well. Finally, our students, of course, form the backbone of this university. They're extremely enthusiastic. When we made a call for volunteers, we had several students volunteering to be of help. I think they will, in a sense, be around through this conference to help us through any concern you may have. You may please direct it to any of the students with the volunteer badges. They're here to help you. They'll direct you at least to the concerned person. And we're indeed grateful that the students have so enthusiastically responded to our call. I wish you all a very pleasant and enjoyable 2 days at the conference. We shall now break in a little while. Prior to that, we'll hand over a gift to the keynote speaker, Mr. Jawhar Sircar. We can now break for tea, and we'll resume at 11:30. Thank you. In this very hall.